Mr. Chairman, our next witness is witness number 5.
Page 317 of your bundle.
It appears at page 317 of your bundle. Good afternoon, witness number 5.
سلام و درود.
Greetings to all of you, dear judges, and all those people who are hearing my voice through the cyberspace. It is really good that we can explain what we saw during Arban so that the people of the world would know what happened between 15th to 18th of November 2019.
Mr. Witness, greetings from us too. Would you repeat after me, please? I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth.
بنده هم خدمت
Do we have you again? Can you hear me?
بله الان
Yes, now I can hear you.
I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth.
بنده سوگند یا
I solemnly declare to tell the truth, to speak the truth,
Truth and nothing but the truth.
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
There'll be some questions from council and then followed by questions from the panel. Could I just remind you, Mr. Witness, that a decision has been made by you to keep your identity secret, so just be careful about what you say.
حتما بله
Of course.
The witness voice is now replaced by the voice of a member of council team. The witness had witnessed the killing of demonstrators during 16th November. Witness number 5, please state to the tribunal what you witnessed on 16th November. The tribunal has received your full witness statement, so please be brief with what you want to say, and you've got 10 minutes. Thank you.
بله بنده الان صحبتمو شروع میکنم
I would like to once again express my greetings to the honorable judges As an eyewitness, as a young individual in my country, so similar to the other young people, I took part in the peaceful protests. In a very peaceful manner, in completely peaceful manner, we wanted to object to the increase in the petrol prices on 15th of November, which was a Friday. People had heard that the petrol prices were to increase. People were unhappy because of the dire economic situation in the country, and they were ready to start a protest because of further economic pressure. And the increase in the petrol prices could have put greater pressure on poor strata of the country. If you pay attention to the number of the people who died, they were mainly poorer, from the poorer classes of people. They were living in the suburbs, and they were objecting to the increase in the petrol prices. And that was the reason they turned out in the streets. So we all turned out in the streets to object, to protest the increase in the prices of petrol. And we wanted to express our objection in a very peaceful manner. When the people went out to the streets, parked their cars on the street, stopped the traffic, they had nothing in their hands. At the first hours, they only had their empty hands and their mouth to cry out their objection. And they expressed their demands in a very peaceful manner. And those who stood in the middle were both young people, mothers, elderly, students, and you can see that there have been many child students among the protesters, among those who have been killed. So the protests started in all cities, and people were objecting. They had gathered, they were clapping hands, and they were objecting to the increase in the price, to the increase in the price of the oil. The same was happening in all cities. We went and we inspected different parts of our city. In Islamshah, Rabat Karim, Shahryar Malard, Fardis, Gohardash. These are all areas in the suburbs of Tehran. All these areas which I am naming, from Fardis and other parts, the protests were all carried out in a peaceful manner. The people were expressing their objection. Then other forces joined in and wanted to oppose the people and to suppress any objection by the people. I want to give an example to the world. I'm happy that I have been able to use this podium. About 4 or 5 years ago, there were some protests in France for the increase in the petrol prices, which was known as the Yellow Vests protests. I think it was because of the increase in the prices of petrol. They all wore yellow vests, turned out on the streets. They protested. Of course, we condemn any suppression of the protests in France as well. Some people got injured, but we had no one killed. But when we started our protests on 16th of November, internet was cut off. We had no means to communicate after. We could not ask about the health of each other to know what our friends were doing from 3 p.m., which was about 5 hours after the protests had started. Internet was cut off. We had neither internet nor WhatsApp, no other any means of communication. And within 2 to 3 days, there were 1,500 fatalities. You can go to the suburbs of the cities. In all areas which I mentioned, they are all satellite towns, and the people are living in poverty. They came to the streets to object to the increase in the prices, but the government suppressed them. Since 3 p.m., when the internet was cut off, the people had no means to communicate. They were on the streets, they were protesting, objecting, they were talking. After a while, apart from the police force, the Basij and the IRGC forces joined in. Those are forces that everyone is familiar with. They entered the scene. They had the heaviest weapons in Qaleh Hassan Khan and other places. They even brought tanks and armored vehicles. They had ordered that the people should be beaten up and suppressed so that the protests would be settled. That was because Khamenei on 16th of November in his higher level class had said that these people are rioters. Well, this was not true. People were just protesting against the increase in the petrol prices and economic hardship. What we realized during those 3 days was that apart from the police, there were some people who were beating the people out of revenge and out of some complexes that they had. So we know that every city has got some weapons. So all these bases used their weapons against the people. They shot people. They fired at people. One of the cities where firing took place and had 3 martyrs. One of their martyrs was a laborer, a hard-working transporter. He had 2 children. One of them was disabled. That 30-year-old young guy was killed before the base by a Kalashnikov bullet. He died in place. The documents are available, the pictures are available. We've sent all of them to the tribunal. There are even more important documents that I may send. You see that I have covered myself behind a mask. I apologize to all the families of those killed during Aban protests. I do not feel safe. For a witness statement, I have to put on this mask. I am really shameful. Just for my own security, I had to do so. If I take the mask off, and if I testify here, in a quarter of an hour, I'll be killed. You know this. And I want all of you to know why I am unable to testify without a mask and to tell you what happened and how the young people were killed on the streets. If I take my mask off, I'll be arrested in 15 minutes. I'm a cultural individual. I work for the Ministry of Education. I studied at the best universities in the country. We are people who turned out on the streets in a peaceful manner. Me and similar people like me and the other young people of our city and our country only received an answer by bullet.
Can you please slow down because the interpreters cannot catch up with you? Can you please slow down your pace of talk?
And just maybe helpful just to
خیلی
direct
ممنون،
the
حتما.
witness to the narrative a little.
Also, please limit your statement. We have the full statement. Just can you give us a short highlight of what you have seen? And then please answer the questions from the panel.
خیلی عالیه و کاملا متوجه.
Yes, I fully understand. I need to name the commanders and the martyrs, and if I do so, then I'll be arrested. But I will do so because in the area where I was, I witnessed 3 people being killed. One was a laborer, a 30-year-old laborer with 2 children. One of his children was disabled. He was shot from the top of the base, police base.
Mr. Witness, if any of the names you're going to mention would disclose your identity, we strongly advise you not to do so. Do not put your safety at risk.
خیلی عالی. بله من
Great. I'll try not to mention any names. I'll just make references. The second martyr I saw was a 19-year-old young individual. That 19-year-old young individual was in the protest. He was also shot from the base. He was hit in the neck. His friends were afraid of taking him to the hospital, as he might have been taken away. So they took him to their own house. He lost his life. Whoever gets injured in any part of the world, he's being taken to the hospital. So the injured would resort to hospital. But on 16th of November, our second martyr, who was just 19-year-old, after he was shot, his friends were afraid to take him to the hospital, as he might have been arrested. So they took him home. And that young man died at their home. So you see what's going on. They were afraid of even going to the hospital. That's how far people are under oppression. A person who has been injured, their friends would be afraid to take him to the hospital. They think that he would be under pressure. So they took him to their house and he died there. And there were individuals who were shooting at people. The IRGC forces and the Basij forces and the police forces were the ones who were shooting at the people. They had their own complexes. They wanted to kill people and wrap up the situation. The Basiji forces were the ones who were shooting. On 17th of November, in the area where we were, they identified 4 or 5 people. They came and took them with private cars, with a Peugeot 405, plain clothes. They went and they took the people who they had identified. They fired shots, and they put them in the boots of the 405 Peugeot 405s. When I talk about Peugeot 405, everybody knows what car I'm talking about. They were just arrested because they had parked their car on the street to object and to protest the increase in the prices of the petrol, and they were identified based on their cars, and they were just being arrested by some plainclothes officers, put in the booth of their cars, and taken away. In Alborz province, in Tehran province, everywhere people were protesting and objecting. But as it is being said, they did not tolerate us. They wanted to implement the instructions of the supreme leader. They suppressed people. They wanted to use brutality. They had no emblems. They had no uniforms. We wouldn't know who they were. They just attacked people. They patrolled the streets. They had firearms, and they had tear gas. And in our own area, where I said that we had 3 martyrs, in Alborz province and in other places, we had over 200 martyrs in Malard. People know where it is, and the Chef Hardis as well. And the other issue that I should say, on 17th of November, the police force had taken the young people into the vans, and that was to prevent them from any participating in any further protests. But the same scene showed to the people that the government would not tolerate any protest by the young people. They would be taken into the pickup trucks, and they will be shown to the other people around the city. And when people saw the scene, they got even more angry and sad. And this is what government forces did. They shot people, they suppressed people, and this is what they did because they wanted to suppress people in Al-Borz province. As I said, the streets were all full of people. They were objecting.
مردم رو سعی می‌کردن به هر وسیله‌ای که شده سرکوب بکنن.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I'm sorry that because our time is very limited and we have your full statement, please answer the questions that the tribunal may have in connection with your statement.
حتما.
Certainly, sure.
Justice Yacoub.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for coming here to help us. You said you decided to stage a strike. That's what your statement says. And strike to me means not going to work. What did you mean by deciding to stage a strike?
Greetings. We talked about protests. People are protesting because the price of petrol had gone up, and everybody who had talked in the protests or participated in the protests were the different strata of society. For example, the workers, people from unions, from the students, university students, and because the because the price had gone up and they had heard about it, they wanted to respond to this in a conciliatory matter and to protest, but they were responded to by truncheons and weapons.
So the only point I wanted clarity on is that there was no strike in the way in which I understand it. There was a protest. That's all, isn't it? I just want to be clear on that.
Yes. No. There was no strikes. It was a protest against the price rises.
There may have been a language problem. I'm not criticizing you at all. Just understand that. All right, then the next matter is that there were lots of people in the crowd, as you say, and I'm trying to understand if they fired as indiscriminately as you say they did, one would have expected many, many people to die, because there were lots of people firing guns. My problem is that 3 people died. That means to me that they were not shooting to death everybody, but maybe some people, I don't know. But
Sorry, he's gone. I'm not sure he can hear you.
If this witness cannot be contacted, can we go to the next witness, please?
صداقت و متاسفانه
Sorry, unfortunately, we cannot re-establish contact. It is ringing, we can hear it, but there's no response.
شما تصمیم میگیرین که با شاهد بعدی
The decision is yours whether we go ahead with the next witness or we wait for this one.
Mr. Chairman, can we call the next witness? It's witness 110, and it appears at page 363 of your bundle.
وصل شد.
We are reconnected.
Okay.
Can the witness hear us now?
بله بله صدای شما.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello again. Yeah, I was saying that there was so much of firing going on that it seems it was interesting to me that only 3 people died. And I'm not saying that more people should have died. I'm very sad about the 3 people that have died. But it seems to me that they selected specific people to kill them, and that is why only 3 people died. Can you comment?
Yes, of course. Yes, a point that I have to refer to is that, Your Honor, Mr. Judge, when we say 3 people died in a city with a population of more than 10,000 people and 500 people were put in prison, this is a small city. It doesn't have any paved roads, does not even have parks, but you have lots of Basij paramilitary bases there. You have lots of people that they had been brought in to suppress the protesters. So in such a city, we had 3 people who died. We had 50 or 60 people who were wounded and they were taken to the hospital. And almost 500 people were arrested during these few years. These are young people. They are still in school, and still they have electronic cuffs on their ankles, and it's a small place when you have 3 people who die, more than 500 people who are arrested. That's a lot. In this city, we know each other, and the security forces were able to identify everybody, and they arrested 500 people. They dragged people out of their shops and arrested them. There was somebody who was just crossing the city, going from here to there, and they arrested him. There was no calm, there was no quiet in the city for a week, and I was an eyewitness, and I saw that the young people belonging to different families were pushed into vehicles of the IRGC and taken away. Was I able to get my point across?
That point across very well, but my question still is, you saw 3 people die, right? Yes.
Yes, and I know their names, and I know their specifics, and I know those who shot them, and we said who the commander of the base was, at what distance they were shot, etc. But if I say all that here, there will be problems. I have sent all these specifics, and I said that I will even come in person to the tribunal to testify. But I am in a place, in a location where I cannot talk very conveniently, and I cannot enter into very many details. So if I say at what range they shot and who shot these the victims, then it will not be very difficult to identify more location. The accidents in the margins of the city were in such a place that the forces from one base were moved to another base.
You saw 3 people shot. Now, how many people were shooting?
معمولا
Normally speaking, they come in groups. That's to say, if you have the Basij paramilitary and the IRGC people who, as they said, they wanted to wrap it up and to suppress people, they come in groups, groups in 50 or 60 people. They are in plain clothes. And in parentheses, I have to say that security forces, for example, the Basij forces that are dedicated to this area would be taken to another area, and vice versa, so that they would suppress the protesters very easily, because everybody in this city knows everybody else. So not to get into trouble for that, they just move them around. They bring the forces from another base to our city and ours to another place. And Karaj would come to Pardis, Pardis would go to Goardash, Goardash would come to Pardis, so that nobody can identify them, and it will be in a better position to shoot people. And when we say the militia, the Basij, you have to consider that in every factory you have a base for them. You have in every office you have the Basij base. You have in a sports club you have the Basij forces. Anywhere that you go, there is an office which they call the Basij or the militia office, and the only duty that they have is to identify people, to identify the protesters, to suppress them, and when they identify them, they crack down on them. So these were these bases that shot people, when people would protest, would get together, they would go on rooftops and they would shoot at them. And those who would shoot, they were the main members of these bases, and they all use Kalashnikovs. Everybody knows that in all of these bases they use Kalashnikov guns, and they go to the rooftops and shoot the commanders of every base. Would give them the direct orders to shoot them either in their head or in their neck.
Please, the interpreters cannot catch up with you.
Counsel, you had indicated the video will be shown before the questions. I would personally be very happy to look at the video before I continue. So I wondered, with the permission of the chair, whether we could perhaps do that.
Justice Jacob, we decided not to show the video for this session. But if you wanted, we can...
No. If you decided not to show it, that's your choice. But if you were going to show it anyway, and you had said you were going to show it before we asked questions, our questions may be more pertinent after we see it. But if you've decided, subject to what my colleagues say, you've made your decision, and we can't question it. So, we know that 3 people were shot dead. We know that 50 or 60 people were shooting. Is it fair to infer that only 3 people shot people dead, which means that the bullets of the other 50-odd people killed nobody?
نه
No, there were protesters, they were protesting, and then there was a commander of a base, and from high up, they were shooting people indiscriminately. You had young people, old people, you had children. When you have these forces, blindly, they just shoot at everybody indiscriminately. People who were protesting peacefully. And one of the pictures of these martyrs shows the person who died because he was afraid to go to hospital. He was not taken to the hospital. In their house. This is the picture of this person whom they did not take to the hospital for fear of the security forces. His name was Sayyid Ali Hosseini, and the date is there, 25th of Aban, 1398.
You. Now, I'd like you to make a distinction between what you actually saw and what you think happened. So I'd like to confirm that you actually saw 3 people die. Yes or no is good enough for me. Don't give a long answer. I just want the confirmation.
بله.
Yes. I saw it with my own eyes. Yes.
Now, 500 people arrested, you did not see with your own eyes.
ببین
You see, in the area that we were, what happened was that, for example, I saw 2 of them myself with my own eyes when they came and they shot in the air. And once we paid attention, we saw that 2 people were dragged out of their houses and they put them in the back of the Peugeot 504 and they threatened them that they are going to shoot them in their legs. They put them in the car and they took them away. And the next days, since we are in an area that everybody knows us, we talked to people and we gathered some statistics. And when we did that, we realized that they have arrested 500 people. Even if somebody had parked their car in that area where the protests were taking place, they would just arrest him and take him away. And they did not even ignore that person. Right now that I am talking to you, there are people from our city, young people, teenagers, who still have ankle bracelets, electronic ones.
Now, the next question I have to deal with is this. There were, you were there, you were part of the protest.
I think we are cut off.
The witness is back.
صدای بنده رو داری؟
Can you hear me?
Right. Okay. So the next issue I want to deal with is you were part of the protest, right? On that first day, the 16th.
بله.
And I'm making
Yes.
between that and the days when you were driving around inspecting. Okay, we'll talk about your driving inspection a little later. But this protest decision, you say it was taken on the night of the 15th. That right? The decision to protest was taken, as I read your statement, on the night of the 15th, the Friday night. Is that correct?
بله
Yes. It was Friday that we realized that the prices were to be increased by the government. Therefore, people peacefully turned out on Saturday on the streets.
That decided on Friday to go on protest on Saturday.
جوان‌ها بود
The young people, everyone, the adolescents, middle-aged people, man, woman, student, shopkeepers, everyone.
A meeting.
قطع شد.
Was there a meeting? You see, there are two things. Either there was a meeting.
نه 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 نه
No, 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 no. It was completely spontaneous.
That
وقتی
is
که
what
من
I
به عنوان
don't.
یک جوان
As a young individual, I heard
No, hold on, hold on a minute. Let me just tell you what my problem is. You see, either, and that's my problem, and you need to help me, either you decided on Friday night that you were going to go on strike, as your statement says, on Saturday, or it was completely spontaneous. I need to understand which one of those you mean, please.
ببینید آقای قاضی
Mr. Judge, when the Iranian people heard the news, young, old, laborer, and others, that the petrol prices are to increase, people decided to react. Therefore, spontaneously, they turned out on the streets. In the morning of 16th of November. That is to say, the people turned out. They told each other, of course, and they turned out on the streets. When they realized that this price increase will affect their life and they will have more hardship, they decided to go to the streets and to protest and to ask the government to listen to what they had to say, a little bit at least. But something different happened. Instead of listening to the people, the government decided to suppress the protests using batons and weapons.
The issue I want to discuss with you is this. There were many, many people injured. 3 people died. How was it that you survived, although you were part of the protest? Was it just good luck? Or you were an expert at evading bullets?
خب من
Allow me to mention a small point. The weapon that we had was a motorcycle. During the protests, all the streets were blocked. Nobody had the chance to move around. The only means that we had to move around was a motorcycle, so we could drive around. We could go and see what the besieged forces were mobilizing and what they were doing. We prepared a lot of films. We sent them to you, and probably you've seen them already.
Sorry, were you part of the protest on Saturday morning, or were you? Sorry.
من کجا درس خوندم مشخصاتم چیه و اینها
I cannot explain where I have studied and how old I am, and all these will identify me.
Asking you that, please, I will not ask you those questions. Were you part of the protest, or were you riding around on a motorcycle, just like the police were riding around in a motorcycle, looking at things?
بنده
I was a protester. I was objecting to the price increase, and my means of transport was a motorcycle. I was able to move around with this motorcycle. Nobody could move around with a vehicle, with a car, but with this motorcycle I could go everywhere, and I could see what was going on. I could see what was going on where, because Alborz and Tehran and other satellite cities are all connected, so I could go everywhere.
I'm sorry, just one final question. I must put to you that my idea of protesting is not driving around looking at what is happening from city to city. Do you have a comment on that?
بله
Yes. I was participating in the protest, meaning that I was driving around. I don't want to say certain things. Because of my job, I don't want to get into details. I have a job which I don't want to name. I should just tell you that because of the experience that I had in my work, I could I cannot explain any further, sorry. But I saw everywhere.
I am very sorry to have bothered you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
بنده هم سپاسگزارم فقط
I am also grateful.
All right, I just have a few additional questions. In your statement, you indicated that at the outset of the protests, that when the police came, the crowd was somehow supportive of the police, and the dynamic changed, and there were clashes and skirmishes. So I would just like to ask you about that. What caused the dynamic to change? Was it something particular or something more general?
Everywhere in the world there are protests. People have protests in other communities. Here the young people were protesting as well, similar to other parts of the world. So the first force that comes to the scene and stands against the people is usually the police. But people know that the police is not a mercenary force of the government. So when the police came there, the people were encouraging the police. They were clapping hands. They were respecting the police. They were chanting the slogan, "Police, support us, support us. We are not saying anything wrong." And many people even talked to the police and told the police that you've got children, you've got family like us. When the petrol prices would increase, that will affect your life as well. So when we were talking to the law enforcement forces, to the police force, they responded, that is true, we're similar to you, but we are officers, we have to do what we're asked to do. But after the people gathered, the first force that appeared before them were the police force, and the people were trying to ask for their support, and they were trying to encourage the police. But after, when the Basij forces and the other forces entered, the issue was over. Then the protests were suppressed. They started beating people, shooting people, and the like. Consider a city where you can only hear shooting and seeing people flee. That is to say, after the police entered the scene and the people were supporting the police and were inviting the police to cooperate and support them, and the police to a certain extent was supporting the people. But in the afternoon at 3 p.m., when the Basij and the RGC forces entered with their plain clothes officers, the protests got a bit violent, and they started beating the people, and they wanted to wrap up the protests, and they were trying not to allow any film to be distributed from the events, and that is why from the 3 p.m. onwards we had no internet.
Thank you, sir.
The 3 young people who were martyred in our street were being killed by Basij and the IRGC forces.
Sir, I have an additional question. It's a sensitive question, so if you feel that is the witness still there?
صدا هست.
I can hear you. Yes.
So with this question, if you don't feel that you can answer it without revealing details about yourself, please indicate. Okay, so it's a warning. But in your statement, you do indicate, you reference a commander which authorized the forces under the commander to do whatever they wanted. Now, are you able to specify what unit was this a commander of? No, I'm not interested in the city or the place or anything like that, but was it a commander of what kind of forces, please?
I fully understood your question. The IRGC has got a unit in every province, and then the Basij is under the IRGC. There are some resistance bases under the Basij. And the IRGC and Basij were in control of all the developments. Can you hear me? And also the commander who started the shooting was a colonel, and he was the commander of a base, and he had 20 bases under his control, and the colonel and the commander of the base ordered the firing. He had a clutch in his own hands, and he was controlling the efforts, and he was shooting himself. I should also say that the same individual who was the commander of the RGC and ordered for the shooting and killed this number of people was replaced after a year. After he was identified, the people knew him and were talking about him and knew that this was the guy who did all that. He was assigned to another location, and someone else replaced him. We have his details, and we have provided all his details to the tribunal, and we can even say where he is now based.
And can you indicate exactly what the order said? You may not know, and that's fine. Just say you don't know. But if you do know, then...
I cannot hear you. There is no communication.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, my question was whether you knew the exact words of the order that was given. Witness, can you hear me?
What I heard through my friends in the police department was that if you had no other chance, then shoot. And the commander had given, and the commander has said that you can decide by yourself, and if necessary, you can use firearms against people.
When exactly was the order given? On which day, at what hour, if you're aware?
Exactly from 16th of November, when people started protesting at 10 a.m. It was about 4 p.m. that the Basij and the IRGC forces took control, and from 4 p.m. that I am referring to, the people's protest became violent because of the intervention of the Basij and the IRGC forces. They started shooting at the people. So it started from 16th of November.
خواهش میکنم.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. I have a few additional questions. Two very quick topics, and then I'd like to return for a second to the issue of the shooting that was taking place. But before then, my first question is, you've mentioned a whole number of groups of security forces, the IRGC, the Basij, plainclothes, and the police. In your various moving around during these demonstrations, did you notice if they covered their faces in any way with masks or other things, or were their faces visible for the most part?
نه 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 نه.
No. They had covered their faces with some sort of cloth. The protests were taking place in every part of Iran and at every street and alley in Iran, and they were coming there, and since the forces belonged to the local, because they didn't want it to be identified, and the Ghor Hardash forces were taken to Fardis, and the forces from the Fardis were taken to Ghor Hardash, and as a result, they were covering their faces so that they won't be identified, even if when they are being moved around, so that they didn't want their forces to be identified, and their weapons. They were walking around with their weapons in their hands. They had Winchester, they had baton, they had walkie-talkie, they had shotguns. And these plainclothes people were walking around, and they didn't have any emblem on their uniform, on their clothes, so that you would never know who was stopping the young man, an old man, a lady. He was just confronting every person who was protesting against the increase in the prices of petrol.
Thank you for that answer. You have clarified an important issue, I believe. Second question, you mentioned in your statement that people set fire to banks, people set fire to gas stations, and by that, and you also mentioned that they were very careful not to set fire to the property of individuals living in the area. And from your statement, I assume you're saying that these were people out protesting who set these fires.
Allow me to explain that people were protesting. They wanted to show their objection. They didn't burn anywhere. The people didn't burn themselves. I believe there were some people from the IRGC. It seems to me that there were people from the IRGC who were burning places so that they would have an excuse to have a crackdown. The same happened in the previous protests. It has always been the like. The Basiji forces go and burn certain places, and then they accuse people. Well, people were there at the front of the petrol stations. They were all excited. Maybe one or two people had thrown some stones at windows. But the point that I want to mention here, and I want it to be clear to you, is that those who went and objected, even if they burned a bank or a petrol station, but they never went to people's properties, and they were just protesting to the thing and nothing else, and they had nothing to do with other things, and there was no house in our area, no shop in our area was burnt down. There were only 2 banks that burned and 2 petrol stations, and that was the whole damage that this city suffered financially, and our young people have objections to the bank that provides 50 million of loan and then receives back 75 million instead, and that is called the Islamic bank, and riba is forbidden. And how could they provide a 50 million loan and get back 75 million? The young people want to get a job. I just said that in parentheses so that you would know what's going on. The people, yes, were gathering in front of the petrol stations and banks. They were objecting, but unfortunately they were being suppressed in such a manner.
So do I understand you correctly that it was security forces who were engaged in burning banks and gas stations? I'm not sure I understood. That it was not protesters.
بله.
Yes. The protesters did not set fire to banks. It was the Basij, the militia, and the security forces. They have operational groups that do these things, and they come and tell ordinary people, see, there are the others who did that, and therefore it gives them a pretext to crack them down. They have circles, they have groups, and the Basij do it themselves. And they know that if they come and they have that pretext, it is more, it's easier for them to suppress people. Did you see that anything else was set to fire except banks and gas stations? Did you see any house burning? Did you see any shop burning? No. Please do take this into consideration very carefully. In our neighborhood, there were only ordinary people who were protesting, but you see that only 1 or 2 banks and a gas station were set to fire. So it's not the ordinary people who did that. They were protesting against something else. They were protesting against the rise in the price of petrol, but this protest was responded to through bullets. And also, you have to consider that on the 25th of Aban and in the afternoon, the internet was completely cut off. And for 25 days, we did not have any internet in our province. Neither did Khuzestan, neither did Sistan, neither did Baluchistan. Nobody had internet. And when internet was there in the central province, those far-off provinces did not have internet until 10 days afterwards. You don't know how many young people and how many teenagers were killed. You don't know what it did to us.
Thank you for that answer. And I have one last area of inquiry that refers to some questions that were asked by my colleague earlier. And I'm returning to the issue of the shooting that was going on. And of course, we are all extremely grateful that only 3 people were killed. I think the concern here, or the question, the inquiry, is that if I understand your statement correctly, there were a significant number of security forces present. They were armed. People were shooting from rooftops. I'm sorry, security forces were shooting from rooftops, that plainclothes and other security forces were jumping out of cars and shooting. So there's a great deal of shooting going on. And I'm wondering if that shooting was constant. Was there a constant barrage? Or were there breaks in time when there was no shooting? Because it does raise the question of how it was, thankfully and fortunately, that with that amount of shooting, only 3 people were killed. Maybe we need a better description of how that barrage of shooting took place.
Thank you for your question. I think I should give some explanation regarding this. When I say there were 3 people dead on one street, you have to consider it in this context, that I live in a place, the population of which is a few 10,000 people. On that street, there is no bank. On the same neighborhood, I'm telling you, 3 people died. We had more than 50 people who ended up wounded. They were shot in their stomachs. And still you can have witnesses who can come here. They can bear their stomach. You will see that this person was shot in the stomach. And even when they went to the hospital, they were still pressured. Yes, they were Basij people, the militia, and any high place that they found, the rooftops, etc. They were shooting, either using Kalashnikovs or others, pellet weapons. They had shotguns with which they shooting, and blindly, indiscriminately, they were shooting towards people. and the highest injury that people saw in our neighborhood was from the IRGC people and also from the militia, from the Basij. They had no mercy. It didn't make any difference for them whether you were a child, you were a teenager, you were a young person, you were old, you were a woman or man. They just wanted to wrap up the protest. And they did that through using the weapons, through direct shooting of the people. That was the only way that they could disperse people. And of course, in the process, lots of people were wounded.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Witness, in your written statement, you indicate that you yourself was hit by pellet and paintball. And usually the paintball is colored, and after that, motorbiker would come and fire from a distance. Could you please tell me, tell the tribunal, what happened to you after you were hit? Thank you.
نیروهای بسیج
the Basij force had, he says, paint roll bullets, so that it would spew paint on your trousers. That would do that so that you could be identified by the intelligence forces. So if somebody wanted to run away from where you were, it wouldn't help because they would know who you were. That's what they did to me. If somebody had been hit by a paint roll, this person would have been arrested. Even if somebody said, I was just passing by that area, they wouldn't listen to you. They would just arrest you because you had paint roll on you.
Yeah. What happened to you after you were hit? Did the motorbiker came to you and hit you? Or?
بله. من اونجایی که صحبت
Yes, yes. Yes, but I was talking, that was the place that I was hit by a paint roll, and there were 3 plainclothes people who were following me. And thank God, there was somebody who knew me and warned me that they are following me. I can even name the exact neighborhood, the exact location, but I'm not going to do it because of security reasons. And therefore, because I was warned, I could escape, and then I was in a position to clean my trousers so that they could not identify me anymore. But the way they operated was that they would ride their motorcycles, they would come among the crowd, and they would shoot you with paint balls, paint rolls. And those who had their trousers painted with paint, then they would be very easy to identify from among the crowd, and those are the ones who would be taken or they would be shot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Witness. No further question.
No further questions, I think, from the panel. Could I just raise one issue which has been raised by a member of the panel? Are there any of these films mentioned by the witness we can have tenders?
They will be all provided to you, sir.
Thank you. If I can just say thank you to the present witness. Mr. Witness, thank you very much for testifying. Difficult subjects, and we appreciate the effort you've made. And we will take everything you said into account. Thank you.